You're listening to HVAC 360, live from the AHR Expo 2020 in Orlando. Hey, welcome back. Matt Nelson here, your host for HVAC 360, helping you be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. I do that either by sharing information, specific lessons learned from the field, or talking with industry experts. I want you to, and usually at this point in time, I encourage you to go over to the newsletter, HVAC360.com, but I really want, if you could, absolutely, I'd super appreciate it if you could jump on over to YouTube, search for HVAC360.com, or search for HVAC360, and click on my channel and subscribe. I'm trying to get my first 100 subscribers. I'm going to start posting some videos here very shortly, and I want you to be part of trying to grow this channel for the HVAC field. All right, so what's up for this week? This week, I have another interview, again at the AHR Expo. I am talking with Bryan Cordill, who is the Director of Residential and Commercial Business Development over at the Propane Education and Research Council. So I had a great interview with Bryan, but I do want you, again, to stick around for some of my post-interview debrief, where I'm going to share even more information with you. All right, enough of that. Let's just cut to the tape with Bryan Cordill. All right, we're here at the AHR Expo. We're actually talking today with Bryan Cordill, who is the Director of Residential and Commercial Business Development for PERC, which is the Propane Education and Research Council. How you doing today, Bryan?
Doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Now, I guess a lot of people, me included, don't really have a good understanding of what PERC is. I think it seems to be one of those items that isn't standard in a lot of places, but in just talking with you briefly before we started the interview, there's a lot of different applications that are really fascinating. I think most of us, propane, we cook with propane. We understand that some houses out in rural areas have propane tanks in lieu of like fuel oil. But can you kind of explain a little bit about the background of PERC and what you do?
Sure. So PERC, or the Propane Education and Research Council, was founded 22 to 25 years ago as a outreach from the independent propane marketers and retailers across the country, the major companies, all the way down to my family operated a 2-location facility in Louisiana, and we lobbied to have Congress allow us to pay, as propane companies, a fee to this new organization called the Educational Research Council. And so PERC markets on behalf of all of the propane sellers in the country to build knowledge. So I'm here today to try to expand the knowledge of your listeners about where propane fits into the commercial scene, where it's available, and where it may or may not make great sense. But so that's what I do, is I try to grow users and uses of propane in the commercial space.
So now, if people don't or aren't familiar, other than just what you typically use it for, where does propane come from? How does it relate to natural gas?
So propane is called a NGL, or natural gas liquid. So as we produce oil or gas in the United States or around the world, you've got, if it's in a liquid state, it's an oil well. If it's in a vapor state, it's a gas well. So associated with that production is these natural gas liquids, of which propane is one, butane, heptane, pentane, and then methane is the natural gas vaporous part of that. So when we produce our oil and gas, propane is a natural byproduct of that production. It's naturally occurring. It's organic, comes from the earth. But C3H8 is the chemical compound. It's odorless, colorless, transferred in a liquid state, and we add a protective odorant to it, so you smell it if there's a problem.
Now, is that odorant? I know that obviously with when natural gas is transported throughout the system, they've already added that odorant to it as a safety precaution. Where exactly? I mean, does the odorant is that in the liquid propane, or is that added somewhere downstream?
So it would be between midstream and downstream. So as it came out of the midstream plant, it would be odorized, transported to the local storage facility, which would then transport and deliver to an end user vessel.
Now, are there certain applications where you don't get an odorized propane?
There's some high purity chemicals. There's some processing, actually process some CBD oil with unodorized. The perfume, the propellants industry uses a lot of unodorized stuff.
So and that is actually going into the products rather than using it for a combustion type process.
Correct.
Now, I guess what are some of the standard uses that you see for propane around the nation?
So I mean, we're almost all, or as a nation, about 75 to 80% of people are familiar with propane. The majority of that may just be in the 20-pound or 5-gallon grill cylinder. We've got the exchange racks at all the big boxes and convenience stores around the country. So that is a good example where to start with cooking. And so then we see residential cooking, we see commercial cooking in restaurants. Think of anywhere that you would use natural gas for heating, air, water, food, any of those functions. Propane would serve that reach as well. The other benefit we have is as an engine fuel. So as we look at generators, backup power, cogeneration, prime power, anything that's engine driven, the emissions of those propane engines are very clean. The life expectancy of those engines is very long. The service cost is very low. Fuel is portable, so it's very stable, so you don't have to worry about diesel failure or gasoline, ethanol weakening the carburetor. You just get away from all of those risks. So really, there's just a wide variety of places we use it. And then, we're sitting on the back of almost every forklift you see running around the job site, and just tremendous numbers of uses in material handling.
So, I mean, is it that much more beneficial than, say, a diesel generator? I mean, do you get the runtime and the lifetime, from propane?
Sure. So you would have, like I said, a stable fuel, so you don't have to worry about gelling or winter conditions with the diesel or start challenges. But you also have something that's either, depending on the engine manufacturer and their system, somewhere between 25 and 95% cleaner and lower NOx emissions than a diesel engine on a generator. So it's a lot better for the environment, as well as being more stable and more predictable and functioning, which is what you really want in a standby power system.
Now, you can use propane in cooling as well. Is that correct?
Correct. So, I mean, internationally, it's a refrigerant. We don't use it as a ton of refrigerant in the United States, but we do have engine-powered cooling. So up to, scalable from, say, 15 tons to 100,000 tons, depending on the size of the application needed.
So now you talk about international. How does PERC kind of position itself internationally? Do they work with other organizations, or what's kind of their?
So PERC would work with the World LP Gas Association on developing technologies and bringing things to the forefront. But our focus is on serving the United States propane marketers and growing the markets for them. So we would help develop technology, bring it in for use in the country, but we would not necessarily spend efforts in something that was just going to be used internationally.
Sure. Now, let's talk about other like applications. Typically, where do you see the propane being used in commercial situations?
So the primary place we see the initial use of propane in commercial is in water heating. So when, if you're in the Northeast and you've had an oil boiler, or you're trying to get away from oil, you need a planned retrofit. Electricity is not a great answer. Natural gas may or may not be available. Propane can come in with like-sized equipment or a lot smaller equipment than a traditional oil boiler and provide that hot water need that you have. Then once you're there, air handling, if it's a hydronic system, you take that same boiler, heat the air, single inlet, single outlet, but two purposes, hot water and warm air or hydronic floor heat. Whatever way you're currently using a boiler, we've got propane product that'll do that as well.
So now I would think, at least in my mind, when I think of, propane, is there any sort of size limitation that you have, because when you talk about the commercial market, obviously, vast majority of the buildings are, on the smaller size. They're not all huge, but do you have examples of larger projects that use propane?
Sure. So Ruby's Inn, which is a hotel in Bryce Canyon National Park, uses 150, I think, tankless water heaters throughout the system in various cabins in heating water for laundry, for cooking. The whole kitchen runs on it. They did the change out about 3 years ago, went from a hodgepodge of different boiler and tank type water heater. And they experienced a lot of challenges when a tour bus would pull in to the hotel. Everybody goes, first thing they do is take the shower. They'd have some outages, and they saved almost $250,000 the first year in refunds that they didn't give patrons that ran out of hot water while they were on their stay. So that storage facility there, they've got multiple tanks, couple of 30,000 gallon tanks, and then multiple 1,000 and 2,000 gallon tanks around the property. So it's the beauty of propane is it's scalable. You tell me what you need to put out, either hot air, hot water, or our burners on a range, and we can develop a piping system for it, and then we can match the storage capacity to the length of time you need or interval between service deliveries. Or if you have a lodge at Lake Tahoe, that the road gets a little crazy, and so there's 30,000 gallon tank tucked in behind the lodge between the building and the golf course. Heats the pool, heats the building, heats the kitchen, heats the laundry, dries the clothes. It's just really anything that you think about in a commercial facility that uses gas. Propane can do that.
So what sort of components, when we're looking at a commercial system, what sort of components would an engineer typically run into?
So you have a site storage location. So your site plan has to be designed to have this facility on site. So versus planning for natural gas to come in from where it is in the on your lot plan, you still bring the gas in the building where you want it. We just develop a storage plan and bring gas from that storage to the side of the building. Pretty much in the building, it's nominal differences between planning a natural gas installation and a propane installation. Delivered typically inside a commercial building, you would have 4 ounces of natural gas pressure where you have 8 ounces of propane pressure. So a nominal pipe size, smaller if needed, but really if you're designing for natural gas, the propane system will function in there. Then we just have to make sure we get the fuel specific appliances if they're not field convertible, and then it's set to go.
Now, as far as the different, you referred to the design of it, and we would help you out. Now, is that sort of a service that PERC performs? Is helping, or
PERC can help design? PERC can put you in contact with the equipment manufacturers that have design teams in house that will work with specifying engineers and planners to make sure that the system functions well. We have. The help that PERC does often is providing you existing case studies. So we have a catalog full of installations and case studies that have been successfully created from a small convenience store with a kitchen in the back to an Amazon warehouse that new construction built with, I think they've got a 750 gigawatts of backup power plus room air heat throughout the building. That project's actually built with synthetic natural gas, which is a way we can go in if you have a building that is on natural gas and suffers from lack of supply, or you're in a climate that the natural gas utility is offering curtailment incentives. So, hey, I know you're our customer, but if you wouldn't use anything for the next couple months, we'll give you a deal the rest of the year. Take, for instance, a school in Minnesota that they can curtail one client and service hundreds of others versus trying to curtail hundreds to service the one. So we come in and build a system that blends air with the propane and delivers what is, in essence, natural gas to the policy project or the building.
So, I mean, you can do that. You can interchange the propane with the natural gas.
Yeah. So it's a mixer that would go in and then just feed the system. So you basically cut the propane mixer on, turn the natural gas off, and nothing changes in the building.
So when you have a project that doesn't have natural gas, and so what do you think about there?
So the beauty of propane is we are available. We're transportable fuel. We can go where natural gas hasn't gotten to yet, or maybe won't go because of extension restraints that they have on their existing infrastructure. So when you look at a project, we see a lot of developers in commercial buildings, particularly in the warehouse space, they're going out and trying to find a valuable piece of property that's close to an interstate to build their distribution on. Most of those mega sites that have been identified have required natural gas as a feature. Well, with propane, you can get the site next door that may or may not have been identified, typically at a lower price because it's not being shopped around the country as a mega site, and then you still have gas available. Propane can be put in on site, so you lower your acquisition cost. If there was a variable cost to the installation because of lack of familiarity or anything, that cost is more than covered in just the acquisition cost of the land alone.
So now, typically, when you're designing a system like this, what sort of refueling? I mean, obviously, it would vary, but is there a general rule of thumb that engineers could say, hey, you know what, count on being refueled every so often?
No, it's really. I mean, the good news is there's no one size fits all approach. The bad news is there's no one size approach that you just take and say this is the thing. So in moderate to mid to moderate climates in the United States, you would have a vaporization rate on a storage vessel of somewhere around 100,000 BTUs per hour for 100 gallons of storage. But because we can vaporize and put a vaporizer on the system, that storage requirement's really not so much about vaporization as it is those days to deliver. And delivery can come anywhere from 2,000 gallons to 3,000 gallon truck to a 9,000 gallon transport delivery. So it's really just it's structural. It can be structured so that you don't have a downtime concern. Storage is met to meet the need in the building, and then the customer and your customer, your end user, and the provider agree on what their minimum level of comfort is in the tank. There's actually remote readers for the gauges, so you can know how much is in the tank. The propane company can know how much is in the tank, and dispatch can be set up to automatically send a load when it hits the previously agreed upon level. Those monitors also have a rate of change indicator to them. So say you've got a big backup power system on it. We don't have to monitor the electric grid. The monitor, when it starts to see a sudden increase in consumption, it notifies the propane company that, hey, they're using the generator basically, or there could be a problem. So in most cases, we know then if there's been a storm or something that it's the generator, and just adapt the delivery cycle to fit.
Now, is obviously with some of the examples of larger facilities with 30,000 gallon tank? I mean, is that an issue that you have to constantly top off the tank to be able to fill it up, or?
I mean, you just schedule delivery. If it's we're talking about 10,000 gallon loads there, so maybe it's a huge processing facility, and maybe they get a load a day or a load a week. It's just how it comes. You don't have to pay a big demand charge from the natural gas utility for a 10-inch line coming in, or demand charge or peak shave for the electric utilities coming in. You just build everything out with a more efficient, more consistent, desirable, clean American fuel for the whole system.
Now, where can engineers get more information about designing systems and the different safeties and how they should go about locating it, protecting it, because obviously it would be one of those things that you'd want to have behind a fence, or there's different things that go along with it. How do they go about getting that education?
So the first step we like to give is one really, really hard to remember website, propane.com. So if you go to propane.com, there's for my business, for my commercial facility, there'll be some information there. There's some safety information. We are working on some, sort of a press kit for commercial engineers. So they've got the basic coverage. At the end of the day, though, it's going to come down to the jurisdiction having control over the facility that's being built. So I can give you national scope from National Fire Protection Association, International Building Code, and what's described and defined as the national minimum. But we would want to put you in touch with someone locally in the area who has a history of working with that jurisdiction to know exactly what their individual requirements would be.
So it's not just, I mean, because you have all these different safeties and things like that, it's not just as simple as, gas coming into a building. I mean, not like it's going to be an onerous concern, but I mean, on a case-by-case basis, you're going to have to be dealing with the, local jurisdiction, the people having jurisdiction over that.
Right. I mean, you're going to have to submit an application for any new building. And so if you've got to design a gas plant for natural gas, when you do it with propane, you just make sure that you've met their requirements as well. There's some distances from combustibles that we want to be sure we maintain where we're actually transferring the liquid. But beyond that, it's pretty much a sealed system. It's other than the burner tip. We intend to have fire there.
Right. Exactly. So I mean, and then that's I guess one other thing that you have to account for in your design is just having that delivery system, having a location where you can get to. Now, I mean, I know that for example, fuel oil. It's one of those things that growing up in where I did, you had the tank in the house and you had a pipe coming out to the street where they would just fill up from there. I mean, is that do they fill up directly to the tank, or are there different options where they can remotely fill up a tank from another location?
Either direct remote. So in your residential spot, we're not going to have a tank in the basement or inside the house. We're going to have to be outside. And so in the commercial spot, we'll be outside. But the distance from where the tank sits to where the truck has to park can be adjusted with it's called a bulkhead, with the connection from the delivery truck to that large storage tank, which has inherent safety built into it, and then you just have a line. I've done 30 or 40 feet at some grain facilities, and it's not hard. It's just pipe.
Right, exactly. But it is an option. So if you're thinking that, hey, you know what, I have to locate it in a certain place, but I have to get a big tanker truck there, that's not necessarily the case.
Correct.
All right. So any other things that you want people to know about PERC or propane in general?
Just that we want to encourage that top of mind presence, so that when you're working on a project and it's somewhere where the grid's being shut down for public safety, or you're worried about resiliency of the project. Natural gas isn't available. Don't go to diesel. Don't go to all electric. Think about the other American gas product that's available to meet the needs of that project. I'm available. Like I said, go through propane.com, but Bryan.Cordill, Bryan.Cordill, Cordill at propane.com. Feel free to reach out to us. Our office is in D.C. I work on the road, travel a good bit, but be happy to help any way we can.
Great. Now, just to kind of to follow up on something you mentioned, obviously as a backup, is this something that is typically, they've used it in certain cases as a backup, like an emergency? I know you kind of mentioned the Amazon, but is this something that they have available from different suppliers, that hey, they can bring a propane tank on site, make sure that you can get the connection and maybe transfer it to a natural gas with the technology you were talking about.
Yeah. So kind of thinking through the backup side, a hospital has to have backup power to meet code. Natural gas does not qualify as a dependable fuel in an emergency to meet that backup requirement. So quite often we'll have a redundant system where they may have a natural gas line run to the hospital and run to the generator, and then we'll have a propane storage tank and a gas line run to that generator as well. It's just a transfer pressure switch. If the pressure in the natural gas line falls, it automatically closes that switch, opens the propane line, and everything keeps going. So it's a proven source as a backup. What we also see is a lot of growth in building operators' mindsets, where they may have started with a storage tank for a backup generator, or distribution for cylinders on their fork trucks, where they're already using propane on site. They start to change out equipment or make updates, and there's new technology with high efficiency, low NOx water heaters and boilers and things that weren't on the market 20 years ago. Maybe they built a building in the late 70s, early 80s, oil embargo concerns, pricing, and we built a lot of all electric stuff then. We can come into a planned retrofit now. You don't have downtime because it's planned. You don't have downtime. You have 2 hours of downtime instead of an emergency replacement where you might be down for a week to 10 days trying to get equipment in and change. So just really thinking aggressively and proactively as you manage your buildings or your designs for your customers, that a planned intentional retrofit to a new high efficiency product can save them considerably over the long term, plus give them the dependability in those storms or outages so that they are resilient.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Matt.
All right. Thanks again to Bryan for taking his time out of his schedule to chat with me. Check out the show notes for links to a few things that we were talking about in the interview. Those show notes can be found over at hvac360.com/142. All right. On for the little pieces of nuggets of information. I think a lot of the interesting stuff, especially from a HVAC standpoint, is we're getting into a situation now where some of the gas companies, either by local regulations or whatever, are stopping extending gas lines, and this is something that doesn't allow people a lot of choice. But you as an engineer, you always want to keep this kind of on the top of your head as far as an option for you. Now, I know as an engineer, that was kind of the last thing, again, I think we kind of mentioned in the interview. I didn't really, as an engineer designing, structures, I didn't really ever consider using propane. There was always a reliable natural gas source there, but that may not necessarily always be the case. So know that propane is there and available for you. One of the nice things is that when you think about elementary schools, some of the elementary schools are typically located in areas that are very residential. You're not always going to get the best gas pressure. Now, when you don't have enough gas pressure, you're kind of limited to what you can do, and the solutions are rather clunky. So using propane in situations like that is obviously one of an idea that you can have that you can kick around. Also, he kind of mentioned when we talked about it, he mentioned a school that really just had a pretty constant 2 megawatt demand on their electricity. But there were situations they had a large auditorium/gym that they used on times. But usually when they used it, it was during the day. And, it was something that really kicked them in the teeth as far as the electrical bill goes, because it was during prime time. Now, you can use propane for cooling applications. And that was something that was really appealing to the school to be able to do that. And I think one of the last things is that, there's a lot of different ways that you can work the system into your project. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times, especially with renewable energy and things like that, there's always a kind of a lease option to do that. You can buy it outright if you want, but if you don't necessarily have the upfront cash, you can always do a lease option. And there's a bunch of different things that you can do. Now, I guess obviously, talk to the Propane Council, propane.com, and see what they can provide over there, what information they can give you, or who they can connect you with. So again, I think what the moral of the story is, always keep propane in mind as a viable solution. It may not necessarily be the one that you choose, but the more you do, it might end up saving you in the long run for that one special project that you have, or along the way. All right. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope that was helpful. If you know somebody who's looking to step up their HVAC game, consider sharing this episode with them, or another one of your favorites. I really don't care, but this by far is probably the best thing that you can do to spread the word about this podcast. Again, extra credit is available for those who want it. Again, going over to YouTube, searching up HVAC 360 or HVAC 360, clicking on that icon and subscribing is going to be a big help. If you're not a subscriber, go over to HVAC360.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Lastly, I would be greatly honored if you would consider leaving me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. This is still probably one of the biggest platforms where people find information about topics they love. And if you love HVAC 360, thank you. But share that with other people. Let them know. A lot of social proof goes a long way. So that's a wrap for this episode of HVAC 360. I'm Matt Nelson, helping you be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. And as always, know what you build and share what you know.